Hey everyone and welcome to my channel. Before I start today's story, I'd like to let everyone know that this was sent in by a subscriber, and if you have a scary story of your own that you'd like me to share on here, feel free to email it to me at the Gmail address in the description below. Now before getting into the details of this story, I need to let everyone know that I heard this story secondhand from a kid I went to school with, and at the time and even to this day, the events that unfolded remain somewhat of a mystery to a lot of people, and there is a lot of skepticism surrounding what happened, even though there's some pretty sinister evidence to back up what this kid was saying. This all happened in a small country town I grew up in. I lived about a 30-minute walk from school, and there was a boy a couple grades higher than me who lived in a large wooden house not far from mine, who I would meet up with for the rest of the journey. Seeing as he was older than me and I was more impressionable around that age, and he was also somewhat of a troublemaker, he always had interesting things to tell me that I found cool at the time, and despite us getting along quite well, when we would get to school we would part ways, and that was that until either the end of school when we would walk back to our homes, or the next morning on the way there again. Now with those side details out of the way, what I'm about to tell you will make a lot more sense. It was a Sunday afternoon and I decided to walk into town that was about 5 minutes further than the school to get some lollies. As I was passing the boy's house, I seen the local police car out front and the Sarge was talking with his father. I was a little curious, but I knew their family was a little bit rough around the edges, so I figured maybe there had been a domestic or some type of family drama. Some time had passed now and I was on my way home passing his house again, and I noticed the police car was still there, but it appeared as though the sergeant and his dad had gone inside the house or out the back. Naturally my curiosity was peaking at this point, and I couldn't wait till Monday morning so I could meet up with this boy and bring it up to ask what had happened. Time seemed to go slow that night, but I dozed off at bedtime as usual, and before I knew it I was getting ready for school the next day. After my bag was packed, I headed out the front door and eagerly made my way to his house where we usually meet up. However, this morning he didn't show. I waited about 5 minutes or so kicking around stones to pass time before I concluded that maybe he was sick and wouldn't be going to school that day, and I headed off. A couple days had passed now and he was still a no-show. I was really starting to wonder at this point, and I knew he had a close cousin at school, so I thought if I got the chance that day I would ask if they knew anything. I ran into his cousin later that day at lunch and hesitantly mentioned the police car being out the front and asked if he was okay. The cousin wasn't much of a talker and just subtly rattled off that he had been in hospital recovering from an injury and would be at school the following week. This made me wonder even more now, and due to my morbid curiosity, I was kind of keen for next week to arrive so I could finally find out what had happened to him. The day was now Friday, with only the weekend left before I could find out how he was doing and what had happened. At second lunch, me and my group of friends were sitting around chatting when another student that was friends with his cousin stopped by the table and asked if I knew much about what had happened or if I had seen him on my journey to and from school. I said I didn't really know much except that he had been in hospital recovering and that I was eager to see him and find out, that's even if he would tell me. The kid proceeded to say that he will be in a cast with a broken arm, but other than that I haven't been told much of the details on how it actually happened. Hearing that jolted my curiosity, and I wondered if he'd fell down the stairs or had been in a skateboard accident, but that didn't explain why the Sarge was at his house speaking with his father. To skip some of the more boring details, the weekend had now passed, which seemed to fly by, and I was getting ready for yet another school week and more eager than ever to meet up with the boy on our walk to school. I headed out the front door and made my way to the front of his house, and with beaming eyes I seen him standing out front. I ran up to him with the usual greeting, and I didn't waste much time firing off questions like what had happened and that I'd seen police out the front of his house and was hoping everything was alright with him and his family. He seemed a bit taken back at first, and it took him a little while to find his words and start unraveling the details of that Sunday morning. He told me that I wouldn't believe him and that he swears everything he's telling me is nothing but the truth, and that he had been having a hard time with his parents and the police getting them to believe him. I somewhat reassured him that I had an open mind, and he went on to tell me what happened, although at the time I had no idea how shocking his story was about to be. He said he woke up that morning to an empty house and a note left on the kitchen counter from his parents letting him know that they had gone out early for breakfast and some quality time and would be home just before lunch. Being left alone wasn't new to him, and he poured a bowl of cereal and went to his room and turned on the PlayStation. It wasn't long after that he said it sounded like a child's laughter coming from the other end of the house. He got up and opened his door and peered out, but to no surprise, he couldn't see any kids and assumed he misheard and went back to his game. Another few minutes had passed and he was about to load into a match when he heard the laughter again, although this time it was louder and more distinct. He got up again and peered down the long hallway of his high-set house and saw no one. He yelled out if anyone was there this time, but thought in the back of his mind he had to be hearing things and went to close the door. It was at that exact moment he heard the sounds of loud footsteps on the wooden floor, like someone was sprinting towards him. He slammed the door shut and stumbled back into his room. He said the footsteps seemed to stop right before his door, and in a moment of complete eerie silence, for a split moment, the door handle started rattling and there was a banging and scratching sound on his bedroom door. He told me he completely froze up for a moment and looked down at what seemed to be a shadow moving around at the bottom crack of the door, like someone was actually standing there. This sent his body into overdrive with fear and adrenaline, and he let out a shrill scream for help before he opened his bedroom window and leapt out, plummeting to the ground about 2 to 3 meters. When he hit the ground, he was knocked unconscious and woke up in screaming agony and immediately noticed that his arm was crooked. He screamed for help, and it didn't take long before some of the neighbors came running to his aid. In a panic at the moment, he tried to utter out that somebody was in his house, and a guy that had ran over to help him ran inside to check if anyone was there, and the others called an ambulance and the police. It didn't take long for them to arrive, and he was whisked off to the hospital. His parents arrived there soon after, but it would be a few hours before he got the chance to explain what had happened to both his parents and the authorities. He said trying to get them to believe him was a nightmare of its own, with 1,000,001 different questions being asked, most of which he didn't have rational answers for. The Sarge had gone around later that day with the father, which is what I had seen that day on my walk past, and did a thorough check of the house inside and out, with no signs of anyone being there or any type of forced entry. And even the man who ran inside to check said he found nothing or no one that seemed out of the ordinary, and that his bedroom door was wide open. Despite the lack of evidence and what seemed like a tall tale from a young child, no one could argue the fact that no one would just throw themselves out a window for no good reason, and he swore he flicked a lock on his door, but that doesn't explain how it was wide open when the neighbor had checked. Now at this point, I had chills hearing this from him, and being a couple years younger made it even more believable, and I was used to hearing some pretty odd things from him from time to time, but nothing like this, and his whole demeanor seemed like he was genuinely shaken and disturbed by what happened. I asked how he can sleep there after that, and he told me that he was going to be staying with his cousin for some time till he was feeling up to moving back with his parents and into the house. I didn't blame him, to be honest. I wouldn't want to sleep there either after that. And once he was back at school that week, it didn't take long for the rumors and speculations to fly, especially being in such a close-knit community where nearly everybody knew each other in some sort of way. A lot of controversy has surrounded this whole incident in our town, and it opened him up to some bullying from the other students who found it absurd, and I admit I felt pretty bad for him. It took a while for things to cool down and the rumors to start subsiding, and after a year or two it was mostly forgotten by everyone. The boy ended up with substance abuse issues as he started high school, and I ended up hearing he was taken to a boys' home after committing some crimes around the local area. His parents moved out after a few years, and no one heard anything more after they left town, and nothing more was ever said about the house or something rational that could explain what happened that day. And although a lot of time has passed since then, some of us local kids who have grown up a lot since then, including myself, still talk about it from time to time and try and wrap our heads around what he possibly could have went through that sinister day.